Yesterday, we started the basic knowledge that we're supposed to have of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what we're reading. And we said that a person needs to believe and know that there is an entity which is first without beginning and end. We explained this yesterday, what they mean, why they're not redundant. And that entity created, past tense, and creates, present tense, everything that exists, which means the creative process is going on all the time. So we say in the davening, Mechadish, Ma'aser Bereishis Tamid. That's the definition of what we call God. And then he said, you also have to know that we can't grasp the nature of his existence at all, nothing other than he can grasp it. We just know that he has all types of perfections, nothing's missing. He has nothing absent that would be a fault to have absent. And we said maybe those are two ideas or the same idea twice. And then he said that we have these things as a tradition going back to the patriarchs, number one. Number two, the whole of the Jewish people appreciated, came to understand these ideas at the revelation at Sinai and understood them to their basis, to the foundations. And then they taught them to succeeding generations. That's why we have them. Because we were commanded to do so by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then he makes a third point that these things could be demonstrated by intellectual analysis with analysis of what you see in the world around you, together with the teachings of natural science about them. But he says, I'm not going to do that. And I don't know anywhere in any of his writings that where he does that. And he may be making reference to the Rambam, the Guide of the Perplexed, where the Rambam does something like that. I'm not going to do that, he says. But I will give you introductions to the basic ideas according to what we have from our tradition. And we'll get the basic beliefs that we're supposed to have one by one. That was what we covered yesterday. We're now up to the third paragraph in the Hebrew rendering. Derech Hashem Chelik Aleph Perek Aleph Os Gimel. And it's, in the English, it's halfway down, which is the necessity of his existence. So he says, you have to also know that this entity, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, his existence is necessary. It's impossible that he should be lacking, missing. That's a very, very difficult idea. And I don't fully understand it. I can tell you a couple of things about it. Intuitively and in philosophy, we do distinguish between things which just happen to be, but didn't have to be, on the one hand, and things which are and seem to be given and the situation can't be affected in any way. So, for example, a table was made. It didn't have to be made. The person who made it could have changed his mind. A person was born because parents conceived him, and the parents could have changed their minds and not gotten married, and then he never would have come into existence. Stars, we think, are born by the gravitational attraction of free dust in space. Gravity didn't have to work that way. Or there didn't have to be so much dust. All that isn't necessary to be that way. Could have been otherwise. In contrast, let's think about the number 6. The number 6. So let's start with a little introduction in terms of thinking about numbers. What color is the number 6? Where is it at the present moment? Nebraska? In the deep sea trench? Where's the number 6? What's it made of? How much does it weigh? Could you dissolve it with hydrochloric acid, the number 6? Don't those sound like the wrong questions? Don't they sound like, you're not talking about the right thing? Because the number 6 isn't a physical object at all. Not a physical thing. So, what kind of thing is it? Let's see. When did the number 6 come into existence? Last year? 5 minutes after the Big Bang? How did it come into existence? What brought it into existence? All these questions sound idle. Number 6, it just is. Even if you think of a big number, a number, let's say, that's bigger than the whole contents of the universe, that doesn't matter, because suppose someone says, let's put there are 6 things in the universe. And somebody says, oh, then the number 7 has no use. Number 7 is useless, it has no application, it's not really real. Now imagine a person saying, well, there are 6 things in the universe, but I could make another one. Shall I? Or shall I not? Well, let's see. If I make another one, then there'll be 7. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. 7 has certain features, and so forth and so on. What am I talking about? How am I thinking about it? I'm using the number 7 to decide what to do. So it must be meaningful, even if there aren't 7 things. Numbers are meaningful, even if don't count anything. So when we talk about numbers, the idea of thinking of them as physical seems to be completely mistaken. And the idea of their coming into existence, there being a time before there was number 7, then after that there was a number 7, seems to be ridiculous. Which then, if you flip it around, imagine the number 7 disappearing. Gee, were we lucky yesterday? Yesterday we had 7. We don't have 7 anymore. The number! Not how many quarters you have in your wallet. No, the number. The whole thing doesn't seem to apply. This is symptoms of what we would call necessary existence. Its existence is given. It just is. And this is something, at least in some areas of philosophy, is well accepted. And it's not only numbers. Let's take qualities. Colors. A color is a feature the thing has, might have. Are the colors just what visual properties things have? So David Hume thought up the following very clever example. Let's say we're cataloging colors. We're doing surveys. We send people out all over the world, deep sea divers, the atmosphere, to catalog the colors there are. And they're recording all the colors there are, making digital photographs, very fine digital photographs. And we gather them. And I say, let's put them in order of similarity. So right, you go from the red side of the spectrum to the blue side of the spectrum, and you have very careful divisions, very shaded divisions, And then you get the whole thing assembled, all the colors there are. And you look along and you see very, very fine divisions, except at one point where there's a jump. There's a jump. The one next is further away from the one before it than all the other ones. All the others are very, very finely shaded, and here the jump is quite visible, quite easily noticeable. So somebody says, hey, there's something missing. In our world, there's a missing color. The color that belongs in this slot, there's nothing in our world that has it. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to happen. There's no guarantee that every wavelength of light has to be reflected by some chemical combination. But then ask yourself, what are you talking about? You're saying that there's, in our world of physical things, there's a missing color. What are you talking about? A missing what? If color just means the visual appearances of the things that there are, and you've got them all represented, there's nothing missing, all of them are there. No, colors are qualities. They're qualities of visual appearance. And you say, there's this quality, this quality, this quality, this quality. I got them all arranged. They're in very fine gradations. And here there's a jump. There's a particular visual quality missing here. I understand it so well that if somebody handed me an object, I'd be able to say, there it is. There's the missing color, the missing shade of blue. It goes right in there. See? Put it in. You'll see it fits exactly right. I know what we're talking about because we're talking about a quality. Qualities aren't limited to the physical objects that there are. You understand the quality, and you could create a new thing with that quality. So that being the case, qualities also are things that are what are called in philosophy abstract. They don't come into existence and go out of existence. You can't manipulate them. You can't obliterate them. You can obliterate all the things that have the quality, but that doesn't obliterate the quality. So we're talking about necessary existence. Philosophy recognizes that in some areas. So when it says here in the third os that of course Baruch Hu's existence is necessary, the idea of necessary existence isn't totally foreign. It's something which people have thought about and at least some people believe in, and others don't believe in it, understand it well enough, they just disagree for certain reasons. But all the things that we have in philosophy whose existence is necessary are totally passive. They don't do anything. Numbers don't do anything. Qualities don't do anything. Here we're talking about an active agent whose existence is necessary. That's a new type of necessity. I don't know how to explain how an agent can have necessary existence. Now, the fact that I can't explain it doesn't mean that the words are just empty, because I know what necessity is. I just don't know how to explain how an agent can have necessary existence. And I think this may be part of what he mentioned in the previous paragraph, where he said the nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence is known only to himself. I think maybe this is where our block comes. We're told it's necessary, but how it can be necessary, we don't know. And that's a permissible form of ignorance. You can very, very often in life, you know that something happened and you've got a clue how it happened. A lot of science is devoted to discovering how things happen. You know they happen because you see them, but you can't imagine how that could be. And you have to do investigation, and no guarantee you'll succeed in the investigation. So this is something we have to take on board with this limited amount of understanding. I don't know how to make it work any further than that. But that's one of the elements that we have to believe about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, basic Jewish belief. The next statement, I would say, expands on it and describes its consequences, which gives perhaps a little more grasp. And that is, you have to know that his existence is not dependent upon anything other than itself. His necessary existence depends only on himself. And believe it or not, this isn't redundant. Because you can imagine a situation like this. I've got a thing A, and here there are two features that are important about A. Number one, A's existence is necessary. And number two, A makes B necessarily. A has a necessary action, necessary function of making B. Now, if A's existence is necessary and A's making B is necessary, what's the status of B? B's got to be there. B can't be escaped because there's a necessary thing necessarily making it, so it's going to be there. But its necessity isn't from itself. Its necessity is coming from something else. And here the Ramchal says, not only must you believe that Hakadosh Baruch Hu's existence is necessary, but you have to believe that it's necessary from himself. Now, we talked about being limited last time. Did I take you through that? Maybe I did it in the nighttime. I can't remember what I do in which shir. There's these features that he's describing of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I think all have one root. They are perfections. Lacking any of them would be an imperfection. I can't define perfection and imperfection. I have to use it in a way that's uncontroversial. If your intuitions disagree with mine, then we'd have to either discuss it or I'll have to give up the point. But for example, something which like you and me is contingent. Yeah, I could be, but I could have not been just as well. Didn't have to be. Nothing pushes it that it's unavoidable. It's avoidable. It's just an accident that it happened. And then, even if it's not an accident, but it is what it is because of something else, so it's dependent on something else. Both being accidental and being dependent are imperfections. A thing would be greater, more grand, more noble, more valuable if it had a necessity which demanded it. It couldn't be absent. And also, if it's not dependent upon something else. So these features, which the tradition tells us are characteristic beliefs of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, come from perfection. And I think we'll get to a point where we'll see that using perfection is very, very important, because some intuitive beliefs that people have about God are wrong. And the reason they're wrong is because they violate perfection. Well, let's talk about it. Yeah.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. Some people will tell you that God can do anything. God could do anything, not limited in his ability to do. God has every ability, because if he didn't have an ability, there was something he couldn't do, then he'd be less. He'd be lacking in power, lacking in resources, he'd be lacking. So you have to say that God could do anything that could be done. Okay, let's try.
Get rid of himself.
Okay, that's one, right? Commit suicide. Committing suicide goes against necessary existence. Necessary existence forbids that. But that's an example. That's a good example, although it's a little more abstract than I wanted to start with. But that's on another side. I want to take ones that are not self-contradictory and are not as sophisticated as this one. How about the ability to learn something new? That's an ability. Everyone in this room has it. Does God have that ability to learn something new? I hope you're feeling uncomfortable. To have the ability to learn something new means that up until then you didn't know it.
But if he's an example of perfection, all knowledge would be within him.
Correct. That's my point. I mean, I'm going more slowly because I want to get the point across without jumping and losing people. But that's the point I'm aiming for. You don't want to say he can learn something new, because to say he can learn something new would mean that his knowledge isn't complete. So now it means that the ability to learn something new is tied to an imperfection. It's tied to an imperfection. Only an imperfect being could have the ability to learn something new. Similarly, with the ability to improve. Only an imperfect being could improve, because if you're perfect, you're already as good as you could be. So does he have the ability to improve? He said, wait a minute. If I give him the ability to improve, then I'm saying he's imperfect. Do I want to say that? Now the right move the move that this gentleman made is to say, well, look, here, I have a choice between saying he can learn something new or saying he's perfect. I have a choice between saying he can improve or saying that he's perfect. I'll choose perfection, thank you. And I will therefore deny those abilities. So then I say, this intuition that God could do everything is naive. It's naive. It's too simplistic. Because some of the things that can be done can only be done by imperfect beings. I don't want him to have those capabilities. I thought that by saying he could do anything, I was making him greater, making him better, making him more powerful, making him more divine. No! By saying that he could do everything, that is every possible ability, I'm saying he's imperfect. So I have to revise it. So here's where I say the commitment to perfection is very important, because certain other intuitive ideas about God will come in conflict with perfection. And when you think about it, the reasonable thing to do is to say, well, we're going to insist on perfection. And if insisting on perfection means I'll have to deny that he has certain abilities, I'll deny that he has those abilities. That's the correct way to think about the Creator, rather than to say he has all his abilities and he's not perfect. And there's no way out. There's no way out. You can't have both of them. Yeah.
So 2 quick points. The first one is, if you're at the top of a mountain, to say that the person that's halfway up the mountain is better than you because he could climb more is not saying that you're better than the guy on top because he's already there. For example, like in our case, if you learn A, you will become, let's say perfection is 100%. Let's say Hashem is 100%. And people, let's say, for argument's sake, you're at 90%, and if you learn A, you'll get to 99 because you can't be perfect. So the fact that learning ability only applies to an imperfect thing, therefore you're above it. So the fact that you lack that ability to learn something is not necessarily imperfection, it's a perfection. So it's better than, meaning... let
me understand you. Are you repeating what I said in other words?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to get just...
Because you are. You're saying exactly what I said.
Perfect. Okay.
That's exactly what I said.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the second idea... I don't. No, I'll wait on the second. I want to see if you cover it.
Okay, that's exactly what I said. In that case, having that ability isn't the perfection; it's an imperfection. Having the ability to climb is the imperfection of not being at the top. Being at the top means there's no place to climb to from there because you're at the top. That's perfection. Okay, so that's why I mentioned here that these items of being having necessary existence and being independent of others, they're motivated by an idea of perfection, which he said before, and it's very important because sometimes people have ideas, and then when you realize that they conflict with perfection, you realize you have to give them up. Yeah.
I don't think you're going to go in this direction, but the ability to learn something and the ability to make something from nothing. Can you draw a clear distinction between the two?
Sure, one is active and one is passive.
So when you learn a new ability, or you discover the color red, or you, like for example, when God created the world, he made something out of nothing. So why isn't that an imperfection in the same way that learning the color red would be an imperfection because you didn't have red before?
Oh, so they talk about this. What was the status of HaKadosh Baruch Hu before the creation? What was his status? If creating is somehow an expression of his perfection, how could it be that there was a stage at which he wasn't expressing his perfection? Did he become more perfect by expressing it? And if so, then beforehand he wasn't? These descriptions make no sense.
But also there's no time.
Okay, that's the easy way out. Of course, there's no time before the creation.
Right, so that means the world exists and doesn't exist, because we know that the world was created, so at some point there was a difference between it was there and wasn't there.
No, that doesn't follow.
So if you remove time is a sequence of events, right? Mm-hmm. This comes and then that happens and that happens.
That's right.
So if you remove that factor, that means the world is there, and the world is there, and the world before creation didn't exist, right?
No, the word before creation is nonsense.
The world before creation.
The words before creation, just those two words, is nonsense, because there was no time. Before is a time sequence. Before creation, Stephen Hawking's example here is, what is 5 miles due north of the North Pole? Sorry, when you move from the North Pole, you go south. In
Right.
every direction, you're going south. So 5 miles north of the North Pole is an inherent contradiction. He says time before the Big Bang is the same kind of contradiction, because Big Bang is where time starts. So there's no before. The question can't be asked.
So,
By the way, there's a medrash which says this almost word for word. The pasuk says, "Ki sheishes yomim asa Hashem es hashamayim es haaretz," which literally read, Evan Ezra wants to put in a base, but the base isn't written. For 6 days, Hashem made the heavens and the earth. Doesn't say in 6 days. It says 6 days. The way the Medrash reads is, for 6 days Hashem made, he made 6 days, and he made the heavens and the earth. But he made the 6 days. He brought time into being. Now, that means that when you trace history back, go back in history, and you said, well, a sequence of events, you come to a first event. At that point, time starts, and matter and energy and all the rest of it start. They all start at that point, and then that's it. That's the whole story. And if you ask what was before that, the answer is you're talking nonsense. That's like north of the North Pole.
So
Now,
the idea of time doesn't apply to it only because time is how we measure our perceptions.
No.
And
No.
it's not how we measure our perceptions.
No.
Let me rephrase that.
No. According to the official story of the history of the universe, there was time before there were perceivers. So the time was there with no perceivers to be measured.
Meaning the time, i.e., the sequence of events, is how the events are. Bear with me, being perceived to you.
No,
Something
no.
happens, but this happens before this, and then this happens before this.
Right.
So I perceive this one before this one.
No, you aren't there. It's going on for billions of years before there were any perceivers at all.
Perfect.
No one perceived those
Perfect.
events.
So take yourself out of this.
Right.
We don't know what was before because we have no way of measuring that.
Of course we do. What do you?
The world starts here.
Okay, look, at this point we're going off into into never land. There's no end to this. There's no problem with this, but time is a feature of the world. The medievals got stuck on this. One of the Christian medievals said there was all that time before the creation. If God does everything for a reason, then he must have had a reason for picking this instant for the creation rather than a different instant. But all the instants were identical, so he couldn't have had a reason. So there's something wrong with the picture of God acting for reasons in the case where there are no reasons. And that, of course, is based on the false assumption that before the existence of the world, there was time filled with identical instants. It's just a mistake.
So when God creates the world, if God is perfection, is the world also perfection? Because that's an emanation from him.
So there are two answers to that question. One is that the simple answer is that it is perfect. It's perfectly suited to its purpose. It's perfectly suited to its purpose. And if one of its purposes is a certain amount of self-development, then it had better be created in an incomplete fashion. And that's perfectly suited to its purpose. If you mean that it's perfect in and of itself, that might not be its purpose. So then you wouldn't want to have it that way. Number one. And number two, both the Kabbalists and the philosophers agree that it's not an emanation. It's not an emanation. There's a break between whatever God is on the one hand and what exists, which is called ratzon. It's called will. And will is something that enables something new to come into existence that wasn't there before. Because were it an emanation, then it couldn't be incomplete in and of itself at all either. It couldn't be perfectly suited for its purpose. So says the Ramchal, so says the Rambam, so says on both sides of the fence. But that's the crucial thing. The Leshem has a whole long section where he makes this distinction between a thing being perfect, a thing being perfectly suited to its goal. I take a jigsaw puzzle. You don't want to buy a jigsaw puzzle for your child when it's all put together, do you? You want to buy separate pieces so he can put it together. Is the jigsaw puzzle perfect? It's perfect for a children's gift in order to enable him to put it together. It's perfect for that purpose. Of course it's in pieces, you don't see the picture, but it's perfect for its purpose. It's exactly the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. That's the kind of perfection that it has. Okay. Okay. Now we're up to Osei. I don't know how he does this here. His simplicity. Okay. I also have to know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence is, now, Pashut means what he says in the next words, without compounding. It's not the result of compounding things together, like water is H2O. And of course, the compounding there is chemical. Hydrogen is a gas, oxygen is a gas, water is a liquid because it's a chemical combination. It's an interleaving of the atoms to make a new molecule. But it's made out of hydrogen and oxygen. If you pass electricity through the water, it will dissociate into hydrogen and oxygen. God isn't like that. He's not made up of separate elements at all. And no multiplicity. The Rambam elsewhere says, even if, he puts it like this, once you have God's unity, as we say in the Shema, is Echad, which means one in all and every respect. So you have, the idea that God is a physical object is ruled out right away. First of all, because he says all physical objects have parts. Now, in his world, that was true. In our world, we are taught that there are some that don't. Of course, being taught that some don't has a sorry history. First, it was molecules that have no parts. And then they said, oh, no, you can break up a molecule into different things. Let's call them atoms. You know what the word atom means? In ancient Greek, it means indivisible. Indivisible. Bedrock. The bottom of the system. It's just that it isn't, right? There are protons and neutrons, electrons and mesons and gluons and all sorts of other stuff floating around in there, right? And then, is that the bottom of the list? Who says? They told you molecules were, they were wrong. They told you atoms were, they were wrong. They told you protons were, and they're wrong there also because the protons are made of quarks. Are the quarks the bottom of the list? Who knows? But supposedly, electrons and photons have no parts. Supposedly, right?
They've never split an electron?
That's right. They never have. They don't, whether it can be done. They don't think it can be done. But, the Rambam says, in addition, every physical thing is made of matter and form. So therefore it's always at least two. There's two elements out of which it's composed. Even if you can't pull them apart, they're not parts, but they're dimensions of which it's composed. In every physical thing, you distinguish between the matter and the form. And therefore, if God's going to be absolutely one, with no multiplicity at all, then he can't be made out of matter and form. And that being the case, it can't be any physical object. So this is a little bit of what the Ramchal is referring to here. He says that he's not a compound of different parts. And also, there's no multiplicity, which takes you beyond the idea of just not having parts, which you can pull it apart and put them in a box. Then he says he calls it simplicity in the English, pashut in the Hebrew. This comes from achdus, from being totally unified. And then he says, all of the different types of perfections that I told you above on the page, that he has all different types of perfections. So you might think, well, if he has all the different perfections, there must be different features of him that embody each of these perfections. He says, no. He is a single thing, but in that single thing, there are embodied different types of abilities in a single thing, and they're all had without any multiplicity whatsoever. Maybe a little bit like you take an elementary particle, it has different qualities. Take an electron. So an electron has a certain mass, which is a resistance to, I'm talking about inertial mass, it has resistance to forces that want to accelerate it. It has a certain charge, it has a certain spin, even it has spin zero, that's a spin quality. It has different features. They're all features of this one thing. It isn't as if the electron has different parts with each feature. It's just, that's what it is. It is this thing with these features. So it's not too difficult for us to imagine the idea of a thing having different qualities, even though it isn't a compound. The Rambam's example, where he's talking about the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does, is fire. And he points out that fire melts certain things and solidifies other things. It burns certain things and it doesn't burn other things. It just heats them up, it doesn't burn them. It blackens white things and can whiten black things. The fire is the fire. The things that it applies to are different. But that doesn't mean the fire is different. The fire is just random molecular motion, or combustion if it's a real fire. So the fact that a thing has different abilities or different actions doesn't mean that it has to be a compound. That's what he's saying here, that he has all these different perfections, but he has it in a completely simple manner. Now, he gives the explanation here, which is Rambam word for word. I told you he quotes the Rambam very often. In the soul of a person, there are many different abilities, and each one of them has its own definition. There are different abilities because they have separate definitions. For example, memory is one thing, one power. Will is another power. Dimion is another power. I want to make a remark here about words. Dimion is often translated as imagination. Rabbi Meisman, who was one of my teachers, pointed out to me, especially in the Rambam, that this translation is very questionable. First of all, the word in Hebrew, dimion, which comes from the word domeh, has no visual features whatsoever. It's not about pictures at all. The word domeh means similarity. Dimion is essentially the ability to categorize and classify, to notice similarities and differences, to be able to evaluate them. It's like a conceptual net. It's not essentially visual at all. And it's very important because when people talk the power of imagination, what they hear is fantasy and prejudice and emotions and inaccuracy and unreality. Because that's what imagination means to them. In Hebrew, dimion doesn't mean that at all. Dimion can be revealing the truth of things, just like your conceptual system, which analyzes and distinguishes things, reveals real important differences in the nature and operation of different things. The periodic table of the 90 or so natural elements in the material world isn't an imagination, but it's a set of distinctions and similarities, which is absolutely crucial. To the point where, when it was incomplete, they could predict what was needed necessarily completed, and they could predict the properties it would have. That's as real as you can get. So, calling dimion imagination, I think, is an unfortunate translation. He says to talk the power of dimion, which I think is the power to classify, to distinguish, and to associate. Now, in a human being, these are different powers because you can have one without the other. You can strengthen or weaken one without strengthening or weakening the other. Some people have great memories, but who are weak-minded in that they can't make consistent decisions, they can't overcome temptation. Some people are very good technicians, but have very little ability to classify new events or existences and to notice the important similarities and dissimilarities. As one of my teachers in graduate school pointed out, every two things have exactly the same number of similarities and dissimilarities. It has an infinity of similarities and infinity of dissimilarities. So saying this is very similar because it's got 16 things in common. Everything has an infinity, every two things have an infinity of things in common and infinity of things that divide them. What counts is what are the important similarities and what are the important dissimilarities. You surely know that once upon a time, whales were classified as fish. They're not classified as fish anymore. Why? Because whales are mammals. Something that gives birth to live young and suckles its young and breathes air doesn't belong together with a shark. There's just two different. So then in the seas, you have different types of creatures, some of which are fish and some of which are mammals. So that was a reclassification on the discovery that things that looked similar, they're streamlined, and they live in the water, have features we didn't dream of, and those features are so important that they deserve to be classified as separate categories rather than as one category. Yeah.
So all these things are products of the mind, right? The categorization, memory, etc. And some people can do more than others. Does any of this persist after death?
Yes, because for us, death is the separation of the soul from the body. And the body disintegrates and is rebuilt in the resurrection to be rejoined with the soul, so that a new whole human being will be constituted. A whole human being, by definition, is a soul in the body. Not speaking for the Rambam now. The Rambam has a different view, but the vast majority of the thinkers have this view. And the one thing the soul can do, even divorced from the body, is to experience, and you can't experience without intellect. Kant was right about that.
So my soul, theoretically, if I was a botanist, I'm going to remember how many scales there are on particular alligators, etc. Is that something my soul's going to
Botanists
retain?
don't do that. They don't deal with that. Botanists study plants. But okay.
Okay, let's go on.
Yeah, so far as I know, yeah, memory will be there. Certainly, memory of your actions will be there, because there are certain things that happen to souls before they become re-embodied, which are dictated by their actions. And the soul understands, I did this in this action, and this is what's happening to me because of it. Understands that very well. So the mental faculties do operate.
Just one more question. Does God actually interact in this world now? Here's the crux of the question. If he creates a perfect universe, and I'm given free will, so I can do something wrong. So if I do something wrong, the other actions around me sort of direct me in a certain path that eventually things are going to turn out right. It's sort of like one of those diagrams, either you go this way or that way.
Mm-hmm.
So is all that sort of prepositioned by God, and he's sort of like a do es mashi? Now, he's out there, but he doesn't really mess with the world, or is he actually, does he actually interact with the world on a...
Well, there are two answers to your question. One answer to your question is that he does interact with it, and the other answer to the question is that he does and does not interact with it. Those are the two questions. Those are the two answers. The first answer is yes. I think by far the more common view, including the Rambam, against the prejudices that you hear, especially in academia, agrees that God is interacting with the world all the time. He says explicitly he's recreating it all the time. He's pumping in a shefa without which it couldn't exist. Were he to stop pumping it in, the world would cease to exist. That's certainly an important interaction. We say it in the davening in the morning. He's making the work of creation continuously. Tamid, Rambam said those words, and he says it in the Mishnah Torah and in the Moreh Nevuchim. So there's no question that he's doing that. And he reacts to people on the basis of their actions. And the Rambam has this in detail, at least in 25 places. One little snippet from part 3, chapter 17 of the guide. Every pleasure, he says, is because of some good action you did, and every pain is because of some crime that you committed. Every one. They're all tallied up with your specific active history. So that's exquisite interaction, continuously, all the time. The slightest pleasure, slightest pain, you got a thorn in your finger and you pulled it out. That's because of something you did. And you had a lollipop, that's because of something you did. So that's going on all the time for everybody. That's certainly exquisite interaction. So that's the first answer. Yes, he's interacting all the time. The second answer, which is that he's interacting and not interacting, is this. He could set up a system which works automatically, but he would do so using his foreknowledge. So he can set up the system taking into account all the future actions, just setting up a system which will react to those actions in the appropriate way. so that when I perform an action and then something happens, I can say, this happened because I acted this way. Had I acted another way, something else would have happened. Kodesh Baruch Hu made it happen because of that. He did it thousands of years ago. So you don't want to call it interaction because metaphysically, he's not, so to speak, online at the moment, making it happen now. But from the point of view of his concern and taking into account and responding to the decisions that I make, they're equal. That's why I call it interacting and not interacting. Okay?